You're still on Newsday, and now we continue with the stories. Elections in many countries are said to be putting freedom and democracy in retreat. Intended as mechanisms for the peaceful arbitration of political rivalries, they frequently become flashpoints for political violence. All too often, elections serve merely to give autocratic regimes a veneer of legitimacy. Countries have therefore been advised on how to strengthen the integrity and legitimacy of their electoral processes and avoid election-related violence. They should look beyond technical requirements and focus on creating conditions for legitimate elections, making it possible to govern peaceably in a climate of trust. Now joining us to discuss electoral matters, especially electoral reforms, is Alistair Soyode, former presidential candidate and Director of Voting Electoral Processes and System Study Inter-Party Advisory Council of Nigeria, IPAC. Good to have you join us on Newsday.
Thank you very much.
Yes. So we're all following the whole process of electoral reforms, and it seems to be the hot topic at the moment. What would you say is for you a top or a key issue that would be the game changer if we're to look for a more transparent and representative form of elections?
Well, thank you very much for having me on. I think the key point here is definitely something that we have to work on. Especially here in Nigeria, we're talking about reform, and it is good that potentially the INEC chairman has been reappointed into office. All the process of things that they say they're going to implement before the 2019 election need to come on board. And again, as we have seen all around the world, even including Ghana, having an e-electoral voting system. I think Nigeria is key. We must change all those processes and allow people to really go out to vote. And again, when we're talking about the process, which INEC know, especially of our candidate, I believe absolutely that what INEC need to do is make sure that all the constitutional reform that they seek in the National Assembly is being implemented immediately, especially in the beginning of his second term in office.
And there has been increasing clamor for diaspora voting for Nigerians, but each time that comes up, a spanner has been thrown in the wheel. What is your take on diaspora voting and the many challenges that the electoral body, seems to have listed as to why Nigeria cannot have diaspora voting at the moment?
Well, really, there shouldn't be any excuse anymore why diaspora voting should not be in place. As you rightly know, we now have the Nigerian Diaspora Commission, which is led by Honorable Abike Dabiri. And before that time, the Nigerian diaspora have been for the last more than a decade attending, intervening, and making a presentation on the need of the diaspora voting. It's not just about the so-called remittances, which at least now the CBN has recognized the influence of the Nigerian economic power contributing to the national development. So I think it is key. There is no excuse whatsoever. As I said, smaller African nations are conducting and allowing their diaspora community to contribute towards that electoral process in their own country. Nigeria being the number one in terms of economy, political reform, population, we must likewise allow our diaspora community to begin to vote. There's no excuse whatsoever. The INEC chairman before then, he has always been saying the process can be executed, can be implemented. All they need to do is the National Assembly to tweak that constitutional amendment, whereby that allow the diaspora Nigerian outside the country to be able to vote. And I think there's no excuse. The president has indicated his interest. The National Assembly has been saying that they will allow the diaspora voting to take place. Presently, we have the bill in the House, which is more or less going for the second reading. And after the second reading, then we believe that the diaspora voting will be a thing of the past. And let's take into consideration as well that the sustainability of the country presently is being contributed by Nigerians outside the country that have been contributing more than $25 billion on a yearly basis to the development of the economy. Now, with what we have seen in the world 2020, challenges all across the world, global pandemic to do with COVID-19, it definitely means that Nigeria actually has been borrowing more. Apart from borrowing more, then it means that we more or less now rely more on the influence and the contribution of Nigerians outside the country. So I think in order to supplement and make things much more easier and even strengthen the electoral process and reform, the diaspora community should be allowed to vote. To be honest, it's as simple as ABCD, because they live outside the country where the process of electoral policy and implementation is well executed. And that means that the Nigerian outside the country can just go to the Nigerian High Commission, be it in London, be it in the United States, in Canada, to go there to vote. Let's start with that kind of voting to make things much more easier for the Nigerians outside the country. There shouldn't be a challenge anymore because we're in advanced technology all around the world.
Okay, thank you, Alistair. We'll just bring in Jide Akintunde, Executive Director to Build a Nation, to join the conversation. Welcome, Jide.
Thank you very much.
Yes. The previous, I don't know if you were listening to the conversation we just had, but his overwhelming impression is that there's no more excuse for not involving the diasporans. And he referenced African nations that are smaller than ours. But could it not boil down to logistics? Because Ghana, as you know, comparatively, the population of Ghana is almost on par with the population of Lagos, give or take 10 million. So what are we looking at here? Could the logistics not be a fundamental obstruction to actually executing what we all desire, which is to bring in the representative voices of those in diaspora?
Okay, first, let me say this, that the window for enabling diaspora voting in Nigeria's election as soon as possible is here now, because there is a process to amend the Electoral Act. You would not have electoral voting if you don't underpin it with a legislation. So the issue right now is not even the logistical challenges for allowing the diasporas to vote, even though I will speak to that very shortly. What is very pertinent at this time is that we have to have the legislative framework for diaspora voting in Nigeria, and this is the time to do that. Let me tell Nigerians that the feeling we are getting is that INEC and the relevant committees of the National Assembly, they seem not to be very interested at this time to have diaspora voting in the next amendment of the Electoral Act. Now, this should concern every Nigerian, and at TBAN, we really want to put as much pressure as possible on these policymakers, because they have to allow this to happen. The reason why Nigerians abroad must be able to vote, some of the economic reasons are known. They are very, very key in providing some sort of financing for this economy through migrant remittances. But it is even more serious than that. Right now, we know that in Nigeria, our electoral processes deliver outcomes that are just not working for the country. Part of it is because the electorates, at least those who care enough to vote in Nigeria, are largely uninformed people who normally, the elites will say that they are the grassroots people, they are the people that vote, and things like that. So we know, of course, that we require new voting blocks in Nigeria to deliver credible electoral outcomes in this country. And one of those blocks would be Nigerians abroad, because you cannot buy their votes. That's number one. We also need the middle class to get its act together and put on a thinking head, because we have seen how continually this system is squeezing us. We're losing our jobs, we're losing our income, simply because during election we believe that we are fine, we have our jobs, but after election, after another government that has no clue about how to grow the economy, has no clue about statecraft, then we begin to see the pressure mount on us. We begin to see our jobs disappear. We begin to see our businesses, collapse. So it is absolutely important that we should put the pressure that is necessary on both the INEC and, of course, the National Assembly, such that this window of amending the Electoral Act is not missed.
Okay, Mr. Akintunde, if you allow me come in here so that we have a conversation. And this is for both of you, but I would like you to start, Mr. Jide, before I take it to Mr. Alistair. Some of the reasons given in the past, as early as this year, before the amendment commenced by the lawmakers, include who really constitutes a Nigerian diaspora? Is it those in the West or those who are living in African countries as well? In what elections do they participate in? Is it the general elections, such as the presidential and national assembly, or do they also partake in local government elections? In that case, which of the local governments would they be voting for? And just few of the many questions that the lawmakers are raising.
You see, Nigeria is not trying to do what is uncommon. There are several countries that have diaspora voting as a matter of course because they have passed the Enabling Act to be able to have this. So there are several frameworks. There is no one-size-fits-all for diaspora voting around the world. So what we should look at is what works for us and what could be the starting point. Usually, you could have a situation, for instance, that the people who will be able to vote have to go physically to maybe the embassy of the country abroad and vote. But there are other countries that even allow you to mail in your ballots. In the case of some countries, they would say you could vote in national elections. Some will say that if you have lived abroad for a certain number of years, but you commit to returning, you can vote. And some people in some countries, including France, absolutely makes it an all-common thing. Citizens abroad can vote without any kind of restriction. So within this continuum, Nigeria can find a comfortable place to start. What is important is for us to start and stop being unready at every point in time that there is a serious issues of national progress. We are always not ready. We are always concerned that we may not get it right. We should get things right. And getting things right starts with starting to doing things.
To do it. Mr. Alistair, do you share those expressions? How many are Nigerians in diaspora? Who constitutes Nigerian in diaspora? Which elections will they vote in? Mr. Alistair, if you can hear me, I'm asking you the same question I asked Mr. Akintunde. The lawmakers have given reasons such as who actually is a Nigerian in diaspora? Is it only those in the West? Are we going to be looking at those also in African countries? How many are we in diaspora? And what elections are we going to be voting in?
Well, definitely anybody who lives outside Nigeria is a diasporian. And so those who live in Africa are diasporians, and they should be allowed to vote in their different African countries. The same thing applies to those who live outside in the West, especially those who live in the West, because they are the ones that have done agitation and participation of nation president. They recognize as a force to contribute towards the national development, towards good governance and leadership of the country. So there's no separation between Africans and Nigerians or Africans in the West. As long as they are Nigerians who are outside the country, they should be allowed to vote. And in two senses as well, voting always come in one, maybe one single piece of paper. So the census of people for those who are outside the country, outside Nigeria, you have the president, the governor, the local government, and the chairman or whatever it is that entail within that period of election. You're using one single ballot paper. There shouldn't be any problem really. And if then we are moving into technology-based electoral process, it means that people will be able to vote from wherever they are using the electoral process, comfortable, transparent, and all info with all honest integrity.
Okay. Sorry, there's a bit of a challenge grasping what you're saying there. But I want to put this question to Mr. Jide. Just to say, I know you said that the first point, of touchdown would be to first pass the law, to first pass a bill in favor of what we're advocating for, which is to include the diasporans. However, could it be that maybe if you marry the two together, define the vehicle by which it will be executed, it would perhaps be more attractive? I say this because you mentioned two options. One of the challenges to maybe saying people should go to an embassy to vote is that perhaps the executive, the current administration may be fearful that then somehow gives over power to a foreign body to determine and collate and who the numbers, which could be crucial numbers when it comes to voting, deciding an election. The other aspect is the postal vote, but we've seen the mayhem that has caused in America, which is much more advanced than we are. So do you see where possibly some of these issues around the vehicle for executing this purpose could be a major hindrance to going ahead and saying, let's go ahead and have diasporan voting?
Okay, please let me first address the issue about the disputation of the election in the United States. What we are seeing really is a party in that election that under no circumstance wants to concede defeat. This has nothing to do about how the American elections work or not. It is just simply about a sitting president who does not want to concede defeat to his opponents. That's what it is.
Sir, permit me to interrupt just to say we do have such people possibly in Nigeria who fit that profile. Would you agree with that? Who may not want to concede defeat?
No, we really haven't seen that, especially because last week you are aware that the election matter was taken to the U.S. Supreme Court and the justices took a decision, and yet the president insisted that he would continue to prosecute his war against the outcome of the American election. You know, in Nigeria, yes, we have seen candidates who have appealed their electoral losses all the way to the Supreme Court. But once the Supreme Court has made a pronouncement, that is usually it in Nigeria. So we would not make those analyses and analogies to undermine the very point that it is time for Nigeria to stop lagging behind. Alistair was very right. Some small African countries, including Namibia, already have the framework, and they have been allowing their citizens abroad to vote in their elections. Our major rival on the continent, South Africa, has diaspora voting. So if you look at this continuum between the very smallest of the countries on the continent and Nigeria's major rivals, they are doing this, and yet we are coming up with excuses that we can't. I think we should reject that. It is very critical that Nigeria's election have a huge dose and participation of informed electorate. That is the crux of diaspora voting. We have to ensure that people are voting knowing the full weight of the decision they are taking when they thumbprint their ballots. That is very key. Now, with regard to how votes may be transmitted and with regard to whether enough people will be able to file at the embassy to vote. Look, with regard to how votes will be transmitted, I think that it is already settled that the next Electoral Act would have electronic transmission of votes, results. So that matter is not even an issue at all. But with regards to Nigerians going to Nigerian embassies to vote, voting at the Nigerian embassy is as good as voting in the country, because that is the Nigerian space in those foreign countries that we have Nigerians. So the issue of foreign interference does not even arise in that scenario at all.
All right, Mr. Alistair, why do you think that anyone would be against diaspora voting? I mean, you've highlighted the benefits of it, both of you. Why should anyone be against it?
I think the biggest thing is the perception. The perception in the sense that what people have been seeing before in the country, that when they vote and they used to believe that their voting has not been counted, is not worth voting in the country. That is the perception. We need to eliminate that perception and saying, well, it doesn't really matter. We want to strengthen our democracy in the country. We want to strengthen providing good governance in the country, good leadership. And in this aspect, at least we know that in the West or in the Western nation, they have advanced a process of their electoral process in those countries. So likewise, we should allow the diasporan to test that kind of thing that we have seen abroad, to transfer that kind of feeling to the Nigerian people. So we need to eliminate the perception. And the other thing is, again, the people of the National Assembly tend to believe that maybe it doesn't really matter because the vote in Nigeria is as high, as big as the number that they so desired. But then again, let's be realistic, saying that the diasporan community, we all agree, have been contributing almost every year the same budget that sometimes the Nigerian government passed as a budget. And this is the same value of money, economy, social that the diasporan community has been contributing to Nigeria. So remove the perception allow the diasporan community to strengthen our process of democracy and electoral process in the country so that the Nigerian people can benefit. And at the same time, we now begin to feel the input of the diasporan community. Let's look at it. In the 1950s, the people that really created that independence for Nigeria, all of them they're technically people who were at home, but they went abroad to go and meet and discuss and deliberate and then seek for the independence of our country. The same thing now we need to do is look into the diasporan community. The only thing they're seeking for is that electoral right, and is a human right as well, a voting right that we need to allow them. We don't even need to be discussing things. Sometimes it's so funny and so shameful that something that just needs to be done, we tend to create a big space and continue maneuvering around it. It is right time for us to move into 2021, allowing the diasporan community to actually vote, allow the bill to pass through the process that it needs to pass, take it off, and then now let's look at how their contribution, not just in economic value, but in creating good governance and leadership in the country.
Okay, thank you for that. Jide, I want to ask two questions in one. Did we learn anything from the NSAS, do you say collaboration? Because we saw a lot of diasporan involvement in that. Somehow they were able to participate in that. Did we learn anything? That's the first question. The second being, we just heard from Alistair that, essentially he's saying, let's just do it. So let's just do it. How does that translate now that you've made a strong case for including the diasporans in the election process? What is the next step?
Oh, great. Now, the key lesson from the NSAS movement is that citizens have to take actions. That protest ended in a tragedy, but we should not overlook the impact that it had and that it has continued to have in the polity. The Nigerian political space, rather than expanding, has been shrinking actually. You can see that with the results of the elections that we have been having since 2003. Fewer people with new elections are voting. So it just means that here people are getting disinterested. And so there's a need for us to nudge our system back to life. That's where the diaspora people will come in and support the local agenda here. So when you clamp down on NSAS protesters here in Nigeria, you can't do the same in Washington. You can't do the same in London. You can shoot people at the Lekki toll gates as the government did, which is very, very unfortunate and very, very condemnable. But you cannot have that happen in Washington. You can't even have that happen in South Africa to Nigerians who are peacefully protesting.
So the government shot at the protesters. The tribunals are still in session. Please go on.
All right. So the key message, therefore, is that the Nigerian diaspora would complement the social and the political progress that Nigerians here are pressing for. We have seen what their impact has been with regard to the economy via the remittances of about $20 billion annually to this economy. It is time for us to also allow the diaspora to have an opportunity to weigh in on social progress in Nigeria, on political progress in the country as well. So that is the lesson. Now, with regard to whether we should just do this, what we are saying is not really that we should just do it. We must do it right. The first step will be for us to have the legislative underpinning for diaspora voting. So it must be included in the next amendment of the Electoral Act. Once that is done, then we should fashion a credible process for allowing Nigerians abroad to vote. Allowing them to vote is not a favor. We're not doing them a favor at all. We are only doing this country a favor if we are able to get our electoral process to yield credible leaders as outcome. The country will be better for it. So let us go for it. Let us do this in the interest of the country, because essentially that is what it is about.
All right, thank you very much, gentlemen. Mr. Kinsley to Build a Nation and Alistair, a member of IPAC, for being on the show today. Much appreciated.